Hastings City Council meeting to order. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First off, we'll have the swearing in of elected officials, so congratulations to our elected council members. We will be reading the oath, and I guess I will be sworn in as well, so. Okay.
I state your name.
I, Mary D. Fasbender,
Do solemnly affirm
do solemnly affirm
that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America,
the Constitution of the State of Minnesota,
the Constitution of the State of Minnesota,
and the ordinances of the City of Hastings,
and the ordinances of the City of Hastings,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of mayor
and I will faithfully discharge the duties as mayor
for the City of Hastings,
for the City of Hastings,
counties of Dakota and Washington,
counties of Dakota and Washington,
and the State of Minnesota,
and the State of Minnesota,
according to the best of my ability and understanding.
according to the best of my ability and understanding. Thank you. Thank you.
I state your name.
I, Angie Haus,
Do solemnly affirm
do solemnly affirm
that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America,
that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America,
the Constitution of the State of Minnesota,
the Constitution of the State of Minnesota,
and the ordinances of the City of Hastings,
and the ordinances of the City of Hastings,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of at-large council member
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of an at-large council member
for the City of Hastings,
for the City of Hastings,
counties of Dakota and Washington,
the counties of Dakota and Washington,
and the State of Minnesota,
and the State of Minnesota,
according to the best of my ability and understanding.
according to the best of my ability and understanding. Thank you.
Make it easy so you don't have to stand there.
I state your name.
I, Dave Pemble,
Do solemnly affirm
do solemnly affirm
that I will support the Constitution of the United States of America,
that I would support the Constitution of the United States of America,
the Constitution of the State of Minnesota,
the Constitution of the State of Minnesota,
and the ordinances of the City of Hastings,
and the ordinances of the City of Hastings,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of at-large council member
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of at-large council member
for the City of Hastings,
for the City of Hastings,
counties of Dakota and Washington,
the counties of Dakota and Washington,
and State of Minnesota,
and State of Minnesota,
according to the best of my ability and understanding.
according to the best of my ability and understanding.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Sure. Council members, if we could step forward and have some photos.
Thank you.
Well, this is weird.
Three, two, one. Okay, and then how about just the folks who were sworn in today? Okay,
Yep.
okay, 3, 2, 1. Thank you.
Can I get one too, guys?
Sure.
Three, two, one.
Thanks.
Yep.
Let the roll reflect that the majority of the members are present and a quorum has been established. We appreciate the residents who volunteer their time and experience serving on the city commissions. Tonight, we are recognizing an outgoing commissioner in John Hensman. You may share us who's leaving.
Okay, thank you, Mayor, City Council members. As the mayor pointed out, commission members are a very integral part of the democratic process here in Hastings. They do a lot of the review work of items that come before the council. The HEDRA, our Hastings Economic Development and Redevelopment Authority, has the additional job of not only being a commission, but being an authority, which means that it has some taxing ability, owns land. It takes care of all of our economic development, industrial park development, grant programs, and other things. So when you take a look at the environment in Hastings that we create economically, it's really at the efforts of the members that serve on HEDRA. And HEDRA is kind of a unique board in the fact that it consists of not only citizen members, but also 2 council members as well. That being said, we do have an outgoing HEDRA commissioner that I'd like to recognize tonight, and that's Scott Sinclair. Scott has served on HEDRA for 6.5 years. He brought a tremendous insight into the board, being a small business owner in the downtown area. So much of what we do, it focuses in and around downtown. Scott's being able to bounce things off of Scott and their effect on the downtown was a great thing to be able to do. Scott was always looking out for the best interests of the city, looking out from an economic development standpoint, that we made sure that the efforts that we made were something that would work out in the end from an economic standpoint and also made sense. So want to thank Scott here tonight. Scott's not here tonight because he's got some more important issues. As he told me this morning, his bride's birthday's tonight, and he had to choose between heading out with his wife and being here tonight. So understand his choice of venues, but still wanted to recognize Scott for his effort and his commitment and all the accomplishments that he's had as part of HEDRA. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, John. And thank you, Scott. Council members, are there any corrections to the minutes from the December 19th meeting? Okay, comments from the audience? For public comments, we have options for comments to be mailed in prior to the meeting as well as interactive featured during the meeting. For the emails, comments, they have been forwarded to the City Council and their receipt is acknowledged. Please recognize that items not on the agenda will not be discussed this evening. Is there anyone that would like to speak to the council at this time? And no one on Zoom. Council items, are there any items to be considered? Okay. The city administrator has advised that number 5, the ENTRF agreement is not ready and should be pulled from the agenda. Council, I would accept a motion to approve the remainder of the consent agenda without number 5. Councilmember Haus, Councilmember Fulch. Thank you. And council, do you have any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor of the motion state by saying aye. 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 Opposed to that motion state by saying nay. And that motion prevails. Tonight, under community development, we have a approve Micromobility license application. And for this item, we have an introduction by Community Development Director John Hensman.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council members. Tonight, as the mayor had mentioned, we've got 2 micromobility licenses up for consideration. I guess the first question to come up is, what is a micromobility license? Micromobility ordinance we adopted last year, it essentially is for small powered vehicles, in this case, electric scooters, the scooter rentals that you have seen around major cities, and a program we had similar here last year. So a little bit of history, we adopted a micromobility ordinance to regulate the operation of entities within public right-of-ways and also establishing a license provision under there for those type of operations. If you're operating a micromobility vehicle, scooter of your own, there's really nothing you need to do other than to follow the law. But if you're operating a fleet rental company, there is a requirement that you become licensed to operate within the city. So tonight, we have two that are under consideration. We have Bird Rides and Spin. And both companies operate motorized scooters. They're both requesting 100 motorized foot scooters for the operation in 2023. So there would be 200 scooters total in this request. A little bit of history and our experience with foot scooters. We did have our first inaugural year last year. Bird Rides was issued a license for up to 100 scooters that year. I believe they deployed around 50 scooters during the year, and the year was somewhat truncated. They did lose their local fleet manager earlier in the year than they anticipated, so they were operational for a few months. During the few months that they were operational, demand seemed to go well in that one. And there was some questions that also came up, some complaints, other things that we saw as well. I did include within your packet there some comments that we had from Chief Wilski of the Police Department outlining some of the observations he's had with the foot scooters as well. So taking a look at this, it's unusual for a city of our size to have two companies vying for scooter operations at the same time. We've found last year that demand appeared to be strong for scooter rental during the first few months of '22, uncertain as to whether this would be something that would be sustained or if this was something that is a new thing. Is there a demand for 200 scooters in Hastings either? I tried to make some determination in looking at comparable sized communities and didn't really see anything. So I don't have a really good answer to that question of whether there would be a demand. From talking to the operators for Bird and Spin, their operation, I think, was both. They both submitted applications based upon 100 being what they thought was operational within the city. Would there 200 be too much? That's a good question. Should there be additional requirements established for the abandoned scooters to ensure prompt response? We did put a couple more blurbs within our license agreement from last year to take care of that issue. The one thing that we are looking at right now is to recommend approval of both licenses, but under one really key point, and that is there's a look-back provision under the license agreement that we can see if 200 scooters is really too much. If it is too much and we see that there's a lot of abandoned scooters and that have not been used, we reserve the right to bring back the contract, the licenses to the city council and to modify the amount of scooters that would be issued. So I just wanted to make that clear that that is something that is within the license agreements of both entities. So officially before you tonight, you've got two actions. One is, and they're both identical, they are to approve the signature of the micromobility license. One of them would be for Bird Rides for 100 scooters, and one would be for Spin for 100 scooters. So those are the two actions we have before you tonight. Those both require simple majorities on each of those. I believe we also have representatives from both Spin and Bird joining us via Zoom, so if you have any questions for them, they can answer those, and I can stand for any questions at this time as well. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Council, any discussion? Councilmember Liefeld?
Thank you. John, I have a few questions. One, I just want to confirm, and I find it ironic because I had this vehicle conversation with a friend the other day. When you talk about Spin, we refer to them as vehicles. Is that an issue at all? I mean, we're clearly talking about scooters, right?
Right, yeah. Vehicle has a very broad term, council member, on this one. That's
Well,
micromobility vehicle.
To the friend I disagreed with, my apologies, you were correct. Accidents. The report here doesn't talk anything about the police reporting any accidents, anything that we should know about?
Council member, not aware of any accidents that we had last year from the scooters.
Okay, because I will say on Pine Street, they were used quite a bit, generally by minors. I found that concerning. I know it's not hard to do. I don't have the app. The only time I ever used it, someone did it for me. So I'm imagining it's not hard to get on their site. So that was concerning, and obviously riding two people, which, hey, if we're not reporting any accidents. And where does the liability fall with that?
Liability would fall within the operators themselves. They are obligated to carry a certain level of liability insurance.
And then my final thought is the comment about it looking unkept, that it does. They're kind of dispersed randomly throughout neighborhoods because I assume that's where they died. So,
Well, there could be where they ended a trip too. 'cause
right,
it's-
right, and
yeah.
that's, well, in the middle of, I think they, when they lose their power, because that's what we did in Minneapolis, they lose their power, you get on the app, you find the next one. Well, in Minneapolis, that's usually a block away. Well, in Hastings, I would imagine it's quite a bit further to hop on another one. So I would be concerned about how they're staging them and where they're putting them throughout the city. That seems concerning to me, but yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was, seemed that people were enjoying them, so. Thanks, John.
Thanks.
Thanks, Councilmember Lightfoot. Councilmember Lund.
Thank you, Your Honor. Well, last year, my concern was, is this stuff going to be laying all over the place? And I voted in favor of it, but hoping for the best. I did not see, well-organized leaving behind of scooters. You've got a lot of individual users, and they all have their own level of tidiness, perhaps. But if this goes forward, I guess I would seriously look at the look-back option here to drive a real clear message to the operators that, we expect that they are coming around on a regular basis and picking these things up, and that they're not just strewn about. Because I wouldn't let my kids leave their scooters in the boulevard somewhere for a week, or whatever. And that's what happens in our neighborhood. We have 3, 4 of these things sitting around, and it just looks like someone left their stuff in the grass, because that's what they did. So I don't want to be like a negative person on this, because I do see there's benefits to it as well. But I think there needs to be some sort of responsibility on these two companies' part to do a good job in being a partner to our city and keeping these things moving, get them out of the areas that they're sitting in for a week, and keeping things clean looking. And I don't know if we have designated drop-off spots that we need to start thinking about or something like that, you must take it here or whatever. But I guess my point has been made. It looks sloppy, and we deserve better than that.
Thank you, Councilmember Lund. Councilmember Pemble.
John, is there, since there's going to be 100 from each company, is there a staging area, how they set it up throughout the town? I mean, I'm thinking that if you put 2 or 3 or 4, and they're sitting on one side of an intersection and the other side of an intersection, it's like, okay, what's going on here? Is there normally, now last year I wasn't paying a lot of attention to where they were sitting. I did see some that were laying in the middle of a sidewalk when I wanted to walk. And, it's like walk around it or pick it up and move it. But is there any kind of staging layout for these two companies for the city? I mean, do they can just put them wherever they want, or I don't want to see them all grouped together and just, one fighting the other at certain locations. That's a question.
Sure. Under the ordinance, there's certain provisions as to how they're staged, not necessarily where exactly, and that is, they can't be blocking a sidewalk, and they have to be upright and not look unkempt. But as far as the staging among the individual operators, really up to them. I mean, there was a couple of places in the downtown area, for example, underneath the bridge, that seemed to be a popular spot that we saw more scooters staged there. So that was what we saw last year. I imagine it would be similar this year as well. They're going to be taking a look at some of the metrics that they have for use and demand, and place them there where they need to be. They'll have the local fleet manager who will be responsible for managing where scooters are, if they need to be charged up or maintained, and so forth.
The second part of the question is, okay, you said that part of this contract is after a certain amount of time, it could be reviewed to see, the numbers. We're talking 100, maybe 50 instead of whatever, what is the segment for the amount of time that goes by? I mean, are we looking at the whole summer and then we'll review for the following year, or is there a sooner review period?
Yeah, Councilmember, we don't have a specific date established within the contracts that are before you tonight. However, in my mind, it would be someplace within the kind of the first third of the summer, say go through June, right around July 1st, do an assessment at that point. I certainly don't want to be in a position where we're going to be encountering problems throughout the year and then not take any action with it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Pemble. Councilmember Fox.
Thanks, Your Honor. John, I do want to just share some feedback from the tourism board. We had a little recap about the bird scooters last year, and the committee was pleased with what the performance looked like. One thing that was interesting, our hotels that are south of town saw a lot of bird scooters there. So we had folks traveling around the city on bird scooters. And I think part of what we're hearing tonight is they tip over. They look a little messy sometimes. When you are riding one, they do give you instructions for how to leave it. So whether that is user error or the wind, it could be a lot of things. But there are really explicit instructions, at least with Bird, about how to properly leave a scooter after your ride. But I think it's nice to hear from the tourism perspective. The tourism board really enjoyed having them available, and that was definitely a boon to their fun tourism opportunities in our city.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Councilmember Fox. Councilmember Fulch.
Thank you, Councilmember. I was curious as to what the business community had to say about it, and then I know that you're active with the Downtown Business Association as well. I think that would be really useful to hear from them and what their thoughts are on it before July 1st, if that's when it is you're going to revisit the issue. And so, I think that would be a great idea to share that with them. I just wanted to share, I was in Austin, Texas, back in early November, and it was interesting. You couldn't just leave scooters just anywhere. You had to park them in designated areas, like they were kind of like bump outs, that were in intersections, and for whatever reason, you just couldn't kill it wherever you wanted. You had to leave it in a zone. And so just something, just to know that it is a possibility, if it really does become a problem. I didn't see them scattered so much just randomly in neighborhoods, but I did see them kind of more up by the Westview Mall area. And I saw a few of them around the roadside park, over by the swimming pool and things of that nature. So it was my thought process that it was minors that were using them a lot. It was, kids getting around and such. And so anyhow, just, food for thought as we're moving forward and review the process. Really, what are our options for regulating it a little bit tighter in case it does, because 200 does seem like it would be a lot of scooters just kind of scattered around the community. Anyhow. So good. Well, it's good to know that we have folks that are interested in it and that if it's helping tourism, that's terrific. So thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Fulch. And I will just add that I did hear people say that their kids used them to get to places because they didn't have any other way of transportation. So I think on that part, that could be helpful, a dentist appointment or whatever they're using it for. But John, I guess my question would be, is there a way that we can ask them to come around and pick them up more often? I mean, because they run out. I mean, I've seen the truck going around town picking it up, but it's not that I'm out watching, but it's very rare that I saw that happening. So is there a way that we can request that we want them to be more accountable in picking them up rather than them laying there for a day or two so we don't have that unkept look?
Sure. And Mayor, are you seeking that to avoid a situation in which scooters are not properly parked, or is is that the primary concern, or do you have a concern, for example, if down by the, someplace by the bridge downtown, you see 3 or 4 scooters parked neatly for rent, but they may not be rented for a couple of days?
No, not necessarily that.
Okay.
I see them on the streets,
Got
like
it.
residential streets, and they're just laying in the boulevards or up against a tree, or they have the app that shows where they're at when they're rested, when they're done. So you'd think that, I don't know if they go through daily, I don't know if they go through 3 days, I don't know if they can keep track on which are out there and being mobile. I mean, I don't know, just a question.
Sure. I know there's a lot of information that they can derive from the individual scooters as far as where they've been, how many trips, how many people. So they'd have the ability to do that. I believe within our license contract right now, we've got provisions, and also under the ordinance, that require them to maintain the scooters within, so they're not messy or in an unkempt manner. So really comes down, I think, to our pressing that issue if it becomes a problem, and them
Sure.
following up on it.
That'd be great, thank you. And Councilmember Haus.
Thank you. My other question I had for you, John, was, it looks like they lost their local fleet manager last year. Is there any way to have a new understanding of if they have a more sound fleet manager this year? Because they closed down operation and it did get very messy. Is that stance that they have, if we know, better off this year so far?
Sure. Very good question. I did ask that of Bird to see if they have hired a new fleet manager, and what assurances that we had to make sure that this is an individual that can make it through the season on that one. I'm uncertain as to whether they've hired that individual yet or not. Perhaps it's a question we can ask of them if Kylie's online right now with Bird, but good question.
Thank you. I do like that it's another sustainable source of transportation around our town as well. We don't have many options, but that would be my only kind of pressing matter is it going to actually get picked up? Are these things going to happen more in a more timely manner as well?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Haus.
Got it.
Did they want to come in and
Yeah,
try to answer that question?
Yeah, I think Kylie Floodman from Bird is in the Zoom meeting. If you can bring her in, Dan?
She's
Okay,
coming.
great. I should put myself on here. Okay. Kylie, can you hear us?
I get a thing showing she's speaking.
Oh, there we are.
Okay.
Yes, happy to answer that question, and thank you all for your feedback, both constructive for next year, and it's obviously great to hear the positives that were received from the community in the operations that we did have. So with regards to our fleet manager, so Bird operates on a fleet manager model, and just to give a little bit of background for what that means, is we actually contract with a local individual and entrepreneur. So really creating a small business within their community. And this is how we operate across the 400 plus cities that we operate in the US and globally. And essentially what this means is they are a contractor, they're not an employee of Bird. However, the way that they are growing their business and how they make money and revenue is directly related to their operations, to how many rides they're getting. So they're directly aligned and incentivized to upkeep the program, ensure they're being rebalanced in places that get more rides. They're not knocked over and unkempt, and they're an attractive thing for people to want to come up and take a ride on. So as you all saw this past season, our fleet manager that we were contracted with was not up to our standards or the city's standards. And we really do keep a good eye on that on a couple different KPIs throughout the season to ensure that the operator that we're working with is upholding our standards and what we expect our program to look like in cities. So we did have that fleet manager. We did terminate our contract with them and work on our resourcing efforts. However, decided because of coming up to the winter season that we would haul off until next year. So in early February, March is when we generally start to resource for our spring season. And in speaking with John, I understand that the disruption and the lack of transportation because of our fleet manager being gone is something we want to make sure that we ensure doesn't happen next year. So obviously, what we're hoping for is that we find the perfect individual, or at least one that we are confident will be able to sustain operations throughout the entire season, from March through when we hibernate for the winter. That said, we do operate in 13 different cities, sub 90,000 populations, 9 of those being sub 30,000 populations within Minnesota, the closest one actually being Bloomington, Minnesota, we just launched in. And due to the nature of our fleet manager business, sometimes these individuals will actually hire multiple employees and really run a local logistics company. So it's not uncommon for us to have a fleet manager and his employees, his or her employees operate 2 to 3 different markets in surrounding areas. So, of course, we would love to have a local Hastings individual be the one that actually runs the business there. Worst case scenario, if we did come to a situation that we did last year, our Bloomington fleet manager would be able to sustain operations until we resourced to ensure that there wouldn't be no disruption in our services.
Thank you, Kylie. Councilmember Lund has a question.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Floodman, how do you determine what is an adequate number of units for a population?
Yeah, absolutely. So we look at this metric that we call rides per vehicle per day. And ideally, we aim to be, and this is bird specific, I imagine other operators are pretty similar, but just speaking on behalf of bird, we aim to be about 1 ride per vehicle per day. That means that we're really sustaining the demand that we're seeing, but not oversaturating the market in the sense to where you do get a lot that are being unridden for multiple days at a time, or causing more clutter, right? So in Hastings, we saw an average of about 1.5 to 1.7 rides per vehicle per day for the months that we were operating, which is pretty much right on par. And looking at that data and discussing with John as well and sharing some information with him, we had about an average of 50 scooters deployed. That said, because we were at that 1.7, we could always go up to about 75 and probably still hit about that 1 ride per vehicle per day, or even decrease in slower months and still hit that deployment number.
Thank you, Councilmember Lund. Kylie, I do have a question. Is there a way that, when we first talked about this last year, of keeping the scooters off of the downtown sidewalk area? I don't know that that actually happened last year, because I did hear some complaints of, it was more of the maybe underage kids on the scooters on the sidewalks in the downtown area. Is there a way that that can be controlled or permitted?
Yeah, thank you for your question, Mayor. So we're not able to fully restrict people in terms of forcing them out to the street. That said, what we really try to do is go with the communication and education first approach. So throughout our app and throughout community enforcement as well, we also can go through and actually, if it is becoming a really big issue, what we've done in some other cities is go through a warning or fine process. So like John said, we have a lot of data in terms of what rides were taken, when they were last taken, and we can see, if a report was sent to us, we can drill down into what user that was and send them a warning. We don't like to fine riders, but if it is something where it's getting to be a real issue and a safety concern in the city, we do have that option. I like to say with, I oversee all of our, sub 100,000 or 100,000 population markets. And I understand that every city is very different and the needs and concerns that you have is very different. So I like to say that all of our programs are very flexible and very adaptable. So we can always pull different levers if it gets to the point where we need to find riders because it's becoming a safety concern. We will work with you guys to understand what needs to be done in order to deter this behavior. So I hope that answers your question.
It does, and then a second question, part to that question is, would there be some type of signage that could possibly be posted in that downtown area so they can visibly see that, so you have something that you can go back on and say, well, the sign is posted there? I mean, what other type of awareness would it be other than them reading on the app?
Yeah, I mean, so there is a sticker on all of our scooters that say our local laws. So it has no riding on sidewalks and some of our other, so our helpline and communication methods that people can use. And then we do have some cities that will put up some signage. From our end, we usually do it more through the app and through our emails that we send to riders, because that's generally what they're looking at. And then through the sticker that we have on our actual vehicles.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Fulch.
Thank you. Thank you, Kylie. I've been in other major cities where it's not allowable to ride those scooters in particular areas, specifically the downtown business, busy sidewalks and such. And so, what happens when you're on one of those scooters is that it just stops driving and boop, 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 boop. And it's amazing. It's like a kill zone. And so I didn't hear you mention that, the implementation of kill zones, so that boundaries are designated around major commercial areas not to allow for that. And so what does it take to do something to that effect? If I'm seriously worried about 200 scooters being in the community and what it does to the downtown, if there's lots of them just littered about. And furthermore, I had mentioned I was just in Austin, and they had like designated areas that you had to leave them, the scooters. You couldn't just abandon one in the middle of the sidewalk. It had to be parked in a very specific area. I don't even think it would let you kill it until you like got it into that area, and then you could kill it. So what are your thoughts about that?
Definitely. So we actually did, we call them no ride zones, or no parking zones. So we actually utilized that in Hastings over the summer for Rivertown Days and a couple other events that we had in the park. So we can put them up on a temporary basis. The issue with the sidewalks is our GPS is not as granular to get, a 10-foot radius. We usually say it's about 10 to 20-foot radius for the GPS when it kicks in. So sidewalks, it's just a little bit too small for where our technology is on that right now. And what we don't want to have is, have a zone that, because of the drift of the GPS, goes into the street, and then someone could be riding a scooter, accidentally run into that zone, and then slow down in the middle of the street. So sidewalks are a little bit of a tricky one that us and other operators are consistently working towards. However, for larger zones, for example, we did it for Rivertown Days. We can create no ride zones for special events. If there are certain areas that are major concerns, in downtown or whatnot, we can always make those slow zones. So similarly to how you saw in Austin, where it kind of went boop, 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 and it stopped, it can do the same thing, but actually slow you down. So certain areas that are either higher traffic, I think you mentioned Pine Street, areas that might be more of a safety concern. So again, back to that flexibility aspect, we have a lot of capabilities there. And then in terms of parking, so a lot of times what cities will do is in certain areas, they'll have those designated parking zones. We also have the ability to do preferred parking zones or recommended parking zones. And so essentially what this is if you were to go end your ride somewhere, and like you were saying, it's pretty laid out in terms of that process for doing so. When you actually go on the app to end a ride, it can show you a virtual parking pin that will guide you into where to park, and still keep that flexibility that a lot of people like to see within micromobility. So still being able to ride it to your end location, but if there's a preferred parking zone a block up or around the corner, we do often see people utilize that method, and sometimes they're either incentivized with $1 off their next ride or a couple cents off their next ride, whatever it may be. So I think there's a lot of really amazing things that we can do with the program in Hastings, and being able to have a full year at it and really plan based off the ridership that we saw last year and utilize that information into further improving what we see in Hastings this year.
Okay.
Great.
Thank you, Councilmember Fulch. Councilmember Layfield.
One last question from me, Kylie. Did you lose any of the scooters?
We do, yes, we do. Well, in every market, so it is not unique to Hastings, but when we bring new scooters to a new city, we do generally see a certain level of theft and vandalism on scooters. Kind of what we put into, the cost of bringing micromobility into a new community and introducing it to new people. So we did see some theft and vandalism following the typical trend. It did die off after about a month. So nothing too terrible, but we did have a couple that were stolen.
Check the river. Thank you, Kylie.
I think we actually did. We might have had a few that went into the river. I think at the very beginning that we had to work with our fleet manager to retrieve.
Thank you, Kylie.
Thank
Your
you,
Honor, I'd like to
Councilmember
make a
Lund.
mo-
Liefeld?
Make a motion to approve the micromobility operation license for both Bird and Spin.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Liefeld. Councilmember Fox? Any new discussion, Council? Councilmember Lund?
Thank you, Your Honor. So we're discussing potentially a review in July-ish timeframe. I'd like to, we're talking about it now. I'd like to be more prescriptive in something like that. So I think it's a good idea that we do review it. Let's say it is July 1st. And leverage maybe the Public Safety Commission as well, just to see what, what ideas there might be for making sure that this is more successful for everybody, right? So Kylie has provided really good context, and I appreciate that she took the time to explain these things so well. It sounds like there's a potential good partnership to make sure that this goes as it should for both of us. When I say both of us, I mean not just me personally, but a little bit me. No, so I think perhaps having that commission utilized in that manner would be a good complement to an overall review, just to see how we can make sure that we're doing this right long term. Because I mean, we have ordinances for things that didn't exist 10 years ago, and then you don't know what you don't know yet, and it's always good to go and make appropriate updates, especially when there's technology involved. I mean, Kylie probably could speak to the ever-evolving technology that their company is working on, and we need to make sure that we're on top of that too, so that our ordinances reflect that. So I think that's a good opportunity to do so.
Okay. Well, Councilmember and the Mayor and Council, what I can commit to do is to provide an update, and I like the idea of being able to check in with public safety and our police to see what sort of comments and things that they have seen, so that we can report back, and if there's adjustments that need to be made, we can make them. So we will commit to doing that at around that July 1st date.
Okay. Thank you, Councilmember Liefeld. Councilmember Pemble?
John, I think that maybe one other avenue to look at is the Parks Department, and kind of get a little review of what they've seen, if they've seen any, and how that's affected their operation. Did they have to move them out to the corner? Were they in the middle of a park someplace that, something needed to be done? I just think that maybe that might be an avenue to look at. I mean, I support this, but my concern is the sheer numbers. If you've got 200 in a community like us, where are they going to be, and how are they going to be left? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
Thank you,
what I'll
Councilmember
do
Pemble.
is with the department, I'll reach out to the department heads during that time frame, so we make sure that we get comments on there from people and how that may affect operations, so that we have a fuller picture to look at.
Okay. There is a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor of the motion state by saying aye. Aye. Opposed to that motion state by saying nay. And that motion prevails.
Thank you.
Thanks, John. And thanks, Kylie and Spin, if they're on.
Yeah, I think we have representatives from Spin as well on there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Tonight, under administration, we have a review of the committee meetings calendar. Dan will give us an update.
Thank you, Mayor. And this really is more of a discussion item, a chance for council to give some feedback, review. It's not an action item tonight, but do anticipate that this will be on the agenda in 2 weeks on January 17th. So whether it's tonight or over the next week, would appreciate that comment. As we look forward to '23, it is going to be a busy year, and not just the normal work that we do, but as I look across the different committees, there is going to be additional stuff coming to administration, operations, planning, public safety, utilities. We're really going to be bringing a lot of stuff through our committees, and I know we've talked a lot the last year or two about embracing the committee structure. We're going to have to do that and do it well this year, just in order to be able to work through the workload. Propose that we use a quarterly meeting schedule for all the committees. That way people can plan in advance. It will be easier for city council members. It'll be certainly easier for staff in terms of the difficulties trying to get meetings scheduled on the current as-needed basis. And I think better and more fair to the public that want to keep some tabs on what's going on, or if they raise a question, and we'll bring that up at the committee. It'd be nice if we could tell them when that committee meeting is instead of some unknown time in the future. The calendar I drafted is primarily Mondays. There's a few Wednesdays in there, but I figured we're already meeting city council on Mondays. It probably doesn't interfere with anybody's bowling league or whatever other things that you might have. So I tried to take a date that hopefully was workable. But with that, did put together a draft calendar that would like to bring to a vote in a couple of weeks, but also because this is new, want input from council, whether it's this evening, over the next couple of the next week and a half. Are there some adjustments that we might need to make to it? You know, hey, this date we just know is wrong. We need more frequently than quarterly. 7 o'clock in the evening really is not a good time. But whatever feedback there might be would really be appreciated.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Council discussion, Councilmember Lund.
Thank you, Your Honor. Well, I think it's a long time coming. It's definitely needed. Appreciate it. I think this allows us to be more planful. We can know when we, let's say, Ops Committee, something comes up in April or June or whatever, and it's not super urgent, then we know we can tuck that in our pocket and be talking about it on August 14th. Rather than having to assemble some sort of meeting just for that one item, which may not, justify the whole meeting time or whatever. But, so I love it. I think it's great. Obviously, the time of day thing, I think, just work through that as we get closer to that time. But quarterly probably is appropriate, and then there's going to be other committees that are going to have additional special meetings scheduled, but you've noted that. So I think that's great.
Thank you, Councilmember
Appreciate
Lund.
that.
Councilmember Fox.
I very much agree, Councilmember Lund. I think this is an excellent step into leaning into our committee structure like we've been trying to do. I think this gives us all a great foundation to plan on, but more than us up here, I think it gives the public a little bit more access to what our schedule looks like and how they can be even more involved in the process that we experience every month. So, Dan, thank you. I think this is a great step.
Thank you, Councilmember Fox. Councilmember Fulch.
Ditto that. I think it's great. So thank you. Just wanted to make sure that you felt well supported in this.
And as Dan and I have talked numerous times, I just think we're all so busy that to be able to put in that date on the calendar so we're aware of it. And personally, I think Mondays are great because we're used to it being off. I mean, some of us have, different types of schedules, so I appreciate it. Just from an organizational standpoint, I think it just gives us all a little better structure. So, Councilmember Pemble.
I would think that the committee process and having set dates, even if it's, by quarter, or some committees may need to meet sooner than that, and have more meetings in a year's time than the 4 that are laid out. But to me, it not only helps the folks that sit up here, but it really helps our staff to be organized and know when and where these meetings are tentatively set to happen. And I support this because I think this is a good step moving forward.
Thank you, Councilmember Pemble. Okay. If you want to move to the next step, Dan, review strategic initiative process.
Thank you. A year and a half ago, September 21, after a several-month facilitated process, the City Council had adopted a series of strategic priorities and initiatives. And when Council did that, it noted that these are the priorities for the next year and a half, give or take, round number. And we're at about that year and a half, and what great timing, since we've got some changes in faces here and a new makeup to the council. And from a staff standpoint, we've essentially closed out that list of priorities. There's work that still progresses with them, but we're in a little bit of a holding pattern from that initial list. So a couple things going forward. One, very much expect that as a city council, we'll be going through a new strategy process, probably not for a couple of months. We've got some other orientation type things that we're bringing through for council. So it's probably February or March before we actually come to the next process. But in advance of that, would very much appreciate, again, this is not an action item tonight, but would appreciate input from council on what might that process look like. Do we do a all-day Saturday retreat, or do we break it into 2 or 3 evenings? What works for people? Do we bring in an outside facilitator like we did last time and some prior times, or do we do it more of an in-house exercise? How much do we build off of the existing structure, existing priorities versus sort of a restart? So ideas that how the progress was reported to the city council and to the public on a quarterly basis. Were those reports clear and effective? So would appreciate input from council over the next month or so that we can start planning and preparing for that next cycle. But the other piece that I want to point out is at the staff level, we're going to be, I'm calling it a 90-day world, but we don't want to see a gap between the current cycle and the next one. So staff's going to be working on a 90-day action plan, avoid having a gap, make sure that we're involving all of the city departments. I think the first round, very good, no criticism by any means, but very good priorities that the council had set. But the first thing I heard the next day from the police department was, no priorities for the police department. Where do we fit in the mindset? And recognize, well, hey, there's a lot of other stuff that the police department that does that's important. It just, it wasn't called out as an extra initiative. But this 90-day world will make sure that we're involving all of the departments and expect that can carry through. So I want to point out that while we're in this transition period at the staff level, we're making sure that we don't have a gap, a 90-day pause, that we're still progressing on areas that we see some priorities and initiatives needed. But really just want to lay that out tonight. If there's any feedback tonight or the next couple of weeks from council on what do you view for the next round, we'd certainly appreciate that as well.
Thank you, Dan. Councilmember Lund.
Thank you, Runner. Dan, I think it's great. Worthy of some chewing on, for sure. So, it's good to have a discussion tonight, but I do think it's good to really kick back and think about it a little bit. My initial feedback is that I do not see a need for a facilitator for a few reasons, but the cost being one versus the value derived. And nothing against any facilitator we've had in the past, but I'd like to maybe be more of a reflective on what we've done and how we've done it, and refine it to fit our way, rather than bringing in a new person and having a new style that we all have to kind of get used to or get on board with for half the time anyway, or whatever. I think we've had enough examples of how to go about this, that we know what worked and what didn't, and how we can maybe go about it. So facilitator, probably not entirely necessary. I can see some value in having a non-partial third-party person lead the discussion, but I see that as different than a facilitator if we were to go that route. I think the structure of how we go about it is something that we could work on together, or we already kind of have baked. The reporting, I think, is overall good. I mean, very thorough. But again, I think there's ways that we can all get together and say what was good and what maybe has an opportunity to get a little better. And so perhaps when we look at how we go about this process, we instead of jumping right into it, maybe there is one of the meetings that we have that isn't looking forward, it's strictly looking back. We can look at how it worked, what went well, what didn't, and how we would massage that going forward, and then be done with it. And then the next time we get together, we're not rehashing any of that. We can just start to work on the new plan going forward. I think it's hard to do another round of this without doing that, and if we really want some output on this one. So those are my feedback items.
Thank you, Councilmember Lund. Councilmember Fulch.
Thank you, Your Honor. Yeah, I partially agree with Councilmember Lund about that it is difficult when you have different, facilitators come in that just, it's like you're starting fresh all over again with a process. And, what I would really like to see is if we were to utilize the group that helped us last time, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the professional consultant's name. What was it? Chad Weinstein, because I think that he really got to know our group in that process, right? That we had a lot of conversations, and I think that he began to have a much better understanding of what it is that we wanted to see as a final piece of product at the end, but it was kind of, too late. We kind of got what we got because, anyone that's done professional strategic planning knows that it's always best to use an outside facilitator to allow for staff to participate in the process and not having to worry about dual hats. And I would like to see us because, what we did last time really wasn't strategic planning, to be quite honest. We didn't do any true problem analysis, utilizing any kind of true metric system, performance metrics. We did not go through and do a SWOT analysis of strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. It was rather, asking each of us what are our pet projects and then voting on it and such. And so I have to disagree that, I was really hoping that our next step would be moving the ball closer to a real strategic plan that was, and to the point of what Dan was just beginning to say, more comprehensive and incorporating all of the departments so that that all of them were striving for improvement, because everybody knows that there's always opportunities. There's also always threats, and so we should always be working towards a cycle of continuous improvement. And then in regards to the format, there was a few times during council conversations during these meetings where it was brought up that it would be really awesome to get a verbal update from staff on some of the initiatives and where they were at. Like, for instance, we had, equity, diversity and inclusion. That was one of our topics, but we didn't really move towards the ultimate goal of doing, more comprehensive training and planning, within the city. It was like we were kind of limping along, hoping that the League of Minnesota Cities or the GARE program would get up and running again. And so, well, let's evaluate that and come back to it. And then, furthermore, the Downtown Business Association, them having conversations, in regards to getting organized and if they wanted to move forward with, an additional sales tax so that those proceeds could go towards infrastructure improvements that the downtown businesses could decide upon, so that they're not coming in to the council all the time and asking for, additional funds to help with whatever little pet projects that they want to do. So I think that there's opportunity to continue momentum there and then to really also circle back and to ensure that truly all of the council members, are in agreement that we checked off all of those items, because I would disagree that we have. And to provide, updates and, where it is that we can continue to keep moving things forward. Also, and lastly, again, using real problem identification techniques and having performance measures for how it is that we're going to determine when it is that we've achieved a success. How are we gonna know where we wanted to be, right? So I think that that there is a lot of structural improvement that we can be doing there, and that's something that I've been saying since the moment I got on this council, is that it would be awesome if we had more systematic planning and an achievement of our goals. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fulch. Councilmember Liefeld.
Your Honor. As far as the last strategic initiative went, it was really hard doing it by Zoom. I feel that it was, personally, I won't speak for anyone else, but having been in it, we didn't know what we were doing for the first few hours of that Zoom. We all, me especially, was like, what's the expectation here? What is he trying to get from us? I love the way that the facilitators handled their conversations, but obviously I think we're more effective in person. That right there. I think it would be great if we could do it in-house, if we or the individual feels that they have the ability to keep us on track, because we can get off track fairly easily, to keep us on track, to keep us focused. I don't know what kind of person that takes. It wouldn't be me. So just if we feel that we've got a staff member who says, yeah, I can, that's definitely something I've studied, whatever, awesome. Otherwise, I say we go with the facilitator. Personally, I would prefer a single long day so that we can keep everything in mind, so we can keep going. Whereas wait, 2 weeks, come back, and then we're sort of starting over on a lot of stuff. The next point, to what extent should we continue and build on the existing priorities, and to what extent should they be new? Obviously, we start with the priorities that we've already established. We get our update, where are we? What do we still hold as significant? And then we build on with our new ones from that. Those are my opinions. I'm just excited to be able to do it in person. I just felt that was horribly ineffective for us, and, so, and I don't think it's any reflection on the facilitators, because Chad and, I don't remember the other gentleman's name, they were very engaging, but I felt like it was a lot like herding cats. And so I think this is something, Dan, and I don't know if everyone else has an opinion, but I think the two of you could make that decision on, do we have someone who's capable and willing to take on that challenge? So, thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Councilmember Liefeld. Councilmember Pemble.
I'm looking at it and saying, here you have two new folks to the table. And for one thing, I think it can't be a Zoom meeting. If we go back into quarantining and everything else, this isn't going to work. It has to be in person. It has to be something that's like an all-day activity, so that you don't split it up and you've got, 3 or 4 segmented items where it's like, okay, do we remember where we were at from the last piece that we started with? I think it's important to have these done and have them done by an outside facilitator. you look at it and you say, the outside facilitator can evaluate, especially if it's a company that can do these and has done them for a number of years for different corporations or whatever, they could see that there's certain aspects that need to be drawn out that really don't get touched when you just kind of in-house it back and forth. And so those are the two things that I think are important, that it's an all-day activity and that we do a third-party facilitator from a reputable firm. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Councilmember Pemble. Councilmember Fox.
Thank you, Your Honor. I agree. I think we could use a facilitator. I think that would be very helpful. As part of the Finance Committee, I'm a little bit interested in how much a facilitator is going to cost. And I want to highlight, I believe an organization needs a facilitator to do strategic planning like we want to dive into. And I think we're at the point with the goals and the strategies that we set and the way that we have been reporting on them to dive in even deeper and to make them really robust so that we can thrive as an organization. And so staff and council have very symbiotic ideas. So I'm interested to see a quote from a facilitator. And I do also believe that we should do it in person and potentially one day shot, because I do remember we struggled with being able to schedule the meetings. So we had a pretty big gap of time between our meetings, and that was very challenging to continue with. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fox. Oh, Councilmember Fulch.
Just the last one thing to piggyback on what Councilmember Fox was saying, it would be really awesome to have all the dates pre-planned if we go into it, because it was a challenge. And when we had the first session, we didn't know when the follow-up sessions were going to be. I think there was like a 2-month gap, and it was, Councilmember Liefeld's completely right. It was totally starting again. It was like, who's on first, what's on second? I mean, it was an ineffective use of our time.
Thank you, Councilmember Fulch and Councilmember Haus.
Thank you, Your Honor. I would like just to ditto Councilmember Fox's mention on that. I would also like to see a quote. I think that'd be very helpful, but I do agree that a facilitator will help keep everything going at least. But I would love to hear more about how it went last time and what improvements could be brought on this next meeting.
Thank you, Councilmember Haus. Councilmember Lund.
Bet you didn't think you'd have this much conversation about it. Well, if you're watching, you'll notice that no one else agrees with me.
What?
So
I was just going to, and then you.
Sure you were. Just fine. They can be expensive.
Right.
And you also don't want to go cheap. So part of my comment was we've had enough experience collectively and historically to look back and see how we've done it and make some decisions on what worked, what didn't. I also did say that maybe we do need a third-party person to lead it. Now, does that mean they need to, is it a $30,000 experience? And that honestly could certainly be the case. I do think that it would be good to reflect prior to bringing anybody in. Prior to selecting anybody, I'd like to have an understanding of what their plan is. Like, here's a quote, here's an example of what we do. All day, multiple days, I don't know. I think you can't use the last one as an example of if all day worked or not. It doesn't matter to me, but I do think you get fatigued after 8 hours of talking about something and you start to maybe not make the best choices, but, that's just my take on it. So I guess the big things are, let's make sure that this starts out well. So it's not like people are saying, okay, welcome to the meeting, what are we doing? And we all need to then agree that once we've made a plan and we're good with it, that we don't go back on it or 2 steps forward, 5 steps back kind of thing, because that's just no good either. So, that's just what I would ask of the council is that we're giving good insight ahead of time so that when we do get there, we're being fair to the facilitator if there is a facilitator, and then we are fair to ourselves that we've agreed on what the plan is, and we just need to march towards that after that.
Thank you, Councilmember Lund. Councilmember Pemble.
I guess my question would be that maybe we should look at having a session that we can sit down and just review to see where we're at, what were the goals set out, and were they accomplished in the manner that was set forth? And then look at it and say, okay, if we want to proceed, do we look and say, by this time, staff has some information on at least a couple, 3 different organizations and, their histories and what they would provide as a outside consultant. But just listening to the discussion, I'm thinking, for Angie and I especially, we probably should sit down and say, okay, we need to have this little review time on an evening somewhere along the way where we can just get everybody's insight on how the strategic plan was laid out, the benefits, the problems, and the process of what everybody here outside of Angie and I have seen how it gets put together. And then move forward from that point and say, okay, here's our options to do a contract with somebody, and this is what it costs, or do we come back and after review say, nope, we're going to redo this in-house somehow. But I think it behooves the city council and the staff to say, okay, this is how this was done in the past, and get us all up to speed on the same page, and then move forward from there. And yes, it takes another meeting, but I think you have a critical part of the people sitting here that, yeah, okay, here's a strategic plan, but what's written, is that was agreed to, and how did we get to the point of saying, okay, those things were achieved? Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Councilmember Pemble. Well, I think we're all in agreement we need an evaluation, and to get Councilmember Haus and Councilmember Pemble up to speed. I think, Dan, you have enough information to go on as to what our discussion was. I think a day retreat would be great, a facilitator, possibly Chad again, because he does know our backgrounds, our histories. He he spent hours with us, so he kind of knows who we are. So he's got some stuff to work with. Great. Looking forward to it. Review of city legislative priorities.
I don't know that I need visual aids with this one, but maybe a little bit it might help. Feeling a little bit like a broken record, this is not an action item, but an area that would appreciate some review, discussion, feedback from City Council about thoughts on where or if we might do something with legislative priorities, and if so, I'm imagining it's probably an upcoming workshop for more of a in-depth discussion. In the past, at least recent years, we've essentially piggybacked on the League of Minnesota Cities and Metro Cities I identified legislative priorities, which there's certainly organizations we belong to and we're committed to, but they, particularly the league, have a pretty broad scope of what they're covering, you know, all the way from Marshall up to War Road, and we happen to be in the middle. Metro Cities is a bit more focused around the Twin Cities, but again, it's not specifically Hastings. And point out, in adopting or in following those organizations' adopted policies, the league has, if you look at, that's where the visual aid is, if I can figure this out. What do I do? Did I push one of these? Too many buttons.
Too many buttons, there you go.
That didn't do it.
This is, okay.
We'll pass. Anyways, it was a matter of being able to show the league's book has 206 policies. Where do we fit in there? Where are our priorities other than saying 206 of them? And then you add on top the metro cities, it's another 111. There's certainly areas that are, I think, probably important to the city. Local control, support for infrastructure, interest in housing, revenue and tax policies, concerns about how Met Council can affect regional development, issues certainly of importance to the city of Hastings, but maybe not Hastings-centric. We have, on a few case-by-case bases, supported, advocated for other very specific pieces. We a year ago, had several projects proposed for the state bonding bill. I think one of those, the Civic Center, still has some legs up at St. Paul, and expect that we'll continue supporting a project in Hastings. Also in the bonding bill, not a city-specific project, not something we applied for, but the state vet home in town. Last year, the city council sent a letter to the House committee saying we support this investment in state facilities in Hastings. Last year, 2 years ago, there was something that came through the league and one of the planning organizations concerned about some legislation that would have really limited local control in zoning. So we had some discussion, and I don't know if it was a resolution or something, but council said, here's a specific piece of a bill up there that we've got concerns with how it would impact Hastings. So we have focused a little bit on a case-by-case basis rather than just following the league and metro city issues, but questions come up. Is this the process we want going forward, or do we want to be more proactive and identify, here's the 6 or 10 or 12, here's the specific lists that are particularly of interest to Hastings, more focused than just here's 206 at the League of Minnesota Cities, which are the dozen that are of specific concern to us. And the one I do need to point out, we know that PFAS regulations and funding for PFAS removal is going to be a priority for us in the coming year, whatever we do. But wanted some input from council on, is the way we've done it in the past comfortable? Do we want to be more proactive? Are there, whether we identify specific issues tonight, or let's schedule a workshop a month from now to talk more about some specific issues? But wanted council input on what direction, or are you ready for taking a direction on legislative priorities? I had an example from Cottage Grove that had laid out very well on sort of a by department. Here's some issues specifically affecting the police department and community development and fire. Technical difficulties, can't pull up that sample, but a matter of, an example of what other communities might be doing. Is that a a format that we want to be taking in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Councilmember Fulch.
Thank you, Your Honor. The example that I had provided to Dan, that's from the city of Cottage Grove, I came about that when I was running for the House. And what had happened was I had contacted their city administrator, and I sat down with her separately from the mayor, and they both referenced that they had a legislative agenda. And then they had provided to me, like after having full conversations with them, they had also then provided to me, and it's only maybe like 10 pages long, and it's well laid out, and it has what their bonding initiatives are in there. And then also, and a lot of the issues, as Dan was mentioning, it broke it out by priority areas that are important, you know, to all of our cities, right? Public safety, housing, local control, and such. And what it mirrored, what I wanted to show you all was, I passed you out 2 pieces of paper. One are just the thumbnail slides. These were the legislative priorities from 2022. The mayor and myself, and I think Lori, we had gone to the advanced program for elected officials, and these were the slides from that. And so what they had done was their legislative priority package mirrored these issues, but then they dovetailed them in together and gave more specific examples from their own cities so that it was more translatable as to, you know, how it is that these initiatives, you know, affect their community. And then for the 2023 legislative priorities, I was the chair of one of the 4 legislative policy committees this last year. I was on the service, improving service delivery. And so some of the issues that we had identified as being highly important, one of the big issues was around ambulance services. The first being that there's this gap between what the federal government is giving back to ambulance services for Medicaid and Medicare patients that are transported and receive service that is actually less than the actual cost. And so our city, as a for instance, is running an annual negative balance where our taxpayers are having to subsidize Medicare and Medicaid, that gap of what we're receiving from the federal government in actual payment. And so Dan thought that there was a ballpark figure around, just right off the cuff when we were having conversation, he thought it was maybe $200,000 a year. And so that's an issue where that affects us financially, right? And that's, you know, federal government. And so there's an issue that and so the way the league, we decided to frame it was, if the federal government isn't going to increase the amount of funding that we're receiving for reimbursement for Medicare and Medicaid, so at least that we're covering our costs, then there's a gap, and asking for the state to step in and help with the public, you know, help subsidize that then, so then our local community isn't, you know, stuck holding the bag for the federal government not stepping up. And then it also gives us leverage to, you know, to talk to, you know, Congresswoman Angie Craig as, you know, one of our representatives about, this is an important issue to us, and we're running a deficit because the federal government isn't doing its part. Some of the other issues that are important this year, if you go to the League of Minnesota Cities website, Dan had provided a link to their legislative agendas. There is the 2023 legislative priorities there, and it's a very fancy, there's these squares when you click on it to highlight what the particular issues are. And, you know, like big issues, local government aid. The other handout that I had provided to you, it's a letter format to a Senator Dornick, and there's actually 25 mayors that have signed on to this particular letter, and it was asking for them to reconsider the local government aid formula because it's only increased by 16% since 2009, whereas inflation has gone up by 27%. And so asking for the state to increase the local government aid formula. And so then that also correlates with, you know, what the League of Minnesota Cities priorities are. And so I just think that there's a lot of opportunities for us if we had a succinct package of our legislative priorities, not just to talk to our House and Senate members of Minnesota's legislative delegation, but rather than to also talk to our congressional delegation, our county. I mean, those of us who have been around for the last 4 to 6 years, we know that housing is a huge issue when you're talking to community members, but that's really the county's ball game, and to continue to, put pressure on the county, to provide assistance with that and to do what we can, within our own city resources. And so I think there's a lot of opportunity. And last but not least, this issue about, local sales tax. We've had discussion, Councilmember Fox and myself and Councilmember Vaughn were on the Finance Committee this last year, and we know how strapped the city is when it comes to the parks and recreation types of infrastructure improvements that are necessary, between the trail system and the ice arena. And so, we should have real conversations about if we want to move forward in asking for that, to go to the voters about, identifying, and we know already what the big projects are for the most part, but really formalizing what is it that we want to do. Because if we want to ask for a local sales tax option, that has to go to the legislature and that has to be passed. Dan was saying that the cutoff for requests for local sales tax options was due at the end of January. And so if we wanted to be serious about that and get that considered yet this legislative year, I mean, we got to snap too, right? And so, so there are some really big issues here that we're facing that, if we have legislative policy initiatives that really affect the bottom line of our communities in so many ways, and that we should be more effectively lobbying other elected officials and putting pressure on them to be more supportive of things that are important to us. So that's my spiel. So thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Fulch. Councilmember Pemble.
Dan, the question I have is, okay, we're members of Metro Cities and the League of Minnesota Cities, correct?
Yes.
And is there a cost endured that the city has to pay for to become a member?
We are dues-paying members for both those organizations. We get benefits from that membership beyond just the lobbying piece, but that's certainly included.
Okay. My next part to that question is who's the city's representative to both of those agencies? Especially the metro cities. Do we have a representative to that organization that can stand up and speak for us? And especially with the Met Council activities and what's going to change in the next decade in this area, especially where we will find a lot of other cities moving in our direction, and we want to be able to support ourselves and voice our own opinion. And I'm just wondering if there was, especially in the Metro Cities organization, if there was a assigned representative to that group.
There is not an explicitly assigned representative to either organization. We have, with the league, in the past had some staff and maybe some elected officials serving on specific committees for the league policy piece. I don't know that we've had an involvement directly with Metro Cities policy development, but we might have in the past, certainly not at the moment. I know I personally meet with Metro Cities staff at least once a year, just as an annual check-in, and discuss some of their legislative priorities and where some of those might dovetail with specific Hastings issues or concerns. But it's not, I certainly wouldn't characterize it as part of the development of their platform. It's giving them some input or feedback, or particularly where there's a local story connected to elements in their platform.
I think just listening to the discussion around the table this evening and saying that, there are concerns moving forward, maybe not right in front of us, but almost right in front of us, that it might behoove us to at least have some more activity with the Metro Cities group to kind of, touch base with how they're proceeding in their particular areas that may be something that's going to affect us moving forward. I mean, bonding, a situation where there's a specific activity in a certain community that's, they're looking at that we can be part of, or part of the information that, okay, the water issue that's coming before us, how do some of these other metro cities have addressed that or look forward for information and how to proceed? Something, it's just, communication goes a long ways, and if you touch base with other organizations that are locally in your area that have dealt with or may have dealt with some of these things, it's a learning experience, and we all need to learn. And because we're here to represent the constituents, and we want to be as knowledgeable in the areas of concern as possible. And these might be some of the ways to do that by, closer interaction with these two organizations, especially the Metro Cities one. Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Councilmember Pemble. Councilmember Fulch.
Your Honor, I just wanted to help also answer Councilmember Pemble's question about the metro cities. There is an electronic newsletter that you can sign up for and receive to read those issues, and there's a lot more specifics about various types of grant funding opportunities and projects that are happening within the metro area. So it's a little bit more pointed than the League of Minnesota Cities. A lot of the legislative policy priorities are mirrored, within, and so if you would like to participate, you as an individual Councilmember Pemble can volunteer to participate. And they have their own, so the league has their policy committee structure, and then the Metro Cities has their own. And so you can participate in that as you'd like. And then furthermore, they do have an annual conference. And it turns into, like, the last few years, it's just been an annual meeting. And so I've participated in several of those the last 6 years. Where it's like a 2-hour forum, and the last few years with the pandemic, they've been Zoom related, and so there's opportunities for you to be engaged in if you would so wish, but there hasn't been an individual within the council that has been actively participating within the metro cities that I've seen updates from or anything to that effect, but. So yeah, there's lots of opportunities for education when you're on the council. And so, it's funny, some of us laugh about how folks don't realize how much work goes to being in the council and staying abreast on a lot of issues. And so welcome to our, to our party. It's a lot of fun. It's a roller coaster, and I hope you enjoy learning about all those opportunities, Councilmember Pemble.
Thank you, Councilmember Fulch. Councilmember Lund.
Thank you. Not specifically to this, but I mean, we talk about these two organizations, and they're our advocates, and we're one voice in the many, and there's a lot of power in what they provide, because quite honestly, we don't have enough manpower to accomplish some of the work that they do, and so there's benefit to that. But there's also benefit to being more hyper-focused on an issue with an individual that has a voice and a vote. So I think we also need to make sure that we're not leaning too hard on these organizations and their legislative priorities, and seeing how we can highlight a couple that match ours. Not to minimize it, okay, but to add to that, I think, whether it's Dakota County or whether we're speaking directly to our state representatives, or even at the federal level, we shouldn't be only talking to Angie Craig when there's a flood. You know what I mean? We have a liaison. We should be leveraging the strategic plan that we create and providing it out to these representatives to say, hey, this is what matters to us in the next X months. Maybe you see something come across your desk that matches that of course, I'm talking about money, but, maybe there's something out there that, oh, hey, Hastings said they wanted to have accomplished this, and I'm staring at this right now. There's an opportunity there. I should either let them know about existing opportunities, or at least I know that we have people in my court to vote for this. So I guess let's not just focus on League of Minnesota and Metro. Let's also make sure that we're looping in some of our other representatives at different levels to know what we care about.
Very good point, Councilmember Lund. Councilmember Fulch.
I'm sorry, Mayor Fasbender.
Okay, thanks, Dan, for all the updates. Council members, do you have any announcements? Okay, Councilmember Fulch.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'm not sure if we provided enough feedback. I mean, from the little bit of conversation that we had that on the last issue about moving forward and developing more of a succinct, identifying a dozen policy issues that are important to us that I think financially impact us is pretty important, particularly as I think that there's a real opportunity in this next legislative session for there to be movement in legislative, priorities, for instance, like local government aid and such. And so I'd really love to see us have the opportunity to put together some forum and that we're having that conversation. Do you feel like that we got that resolved?
I don't think it's my turn to speak.
Yeah, I know. Just bringing it up. It seems like we just kind of left that as to not identifying what the next issues are going to be. So circling back to that, I mean, did we provide enough
Dan,
input?
do you feel you have enough?
I think we have enough for January 3rd, but not a long-term piece. I believe that, as an example, if there's between the league and Metro Cities over 300 policies, as well as great ideas that might be in your heads or conversations with constituents, we would need some chance to review and refine and come up with a dozen, and just saying, let's get the dozen tonight, that's not realistic.
Right, exactly.
But I do think that there were some comments here. I like the idea of making sure we engage with the League of Metro Cities and other federal and county officials and have them, loop them in. I heard the comment. I think there's some pieces like that that I certainly took away, but I think beyond that is a matter of our next step, whether it's during a council meeting or a workshop a month and a half, 2 months out, would be to how do we sift through and narrow up that long list and come up with, here's a dozen, if that, whatever the magic number is. So I think there's enough tonight, but if we're going to want to do something, which is sort of the general consensus I heard, was we should have a Hastings list.
Yes.
That's something we'll have to do at a future meeting.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure that we articulated that and that the league does have the priorities for 2023 out there now, and they're very similar to what they were in the last legislative session, and a lot of them have a lot of financial impacts to our communities. And so I think that's why I just want to make sure that we're prepared. Then we're going to continue to have that conversation so it didn't fall off. Okay, thanks. And then I did actually have an announcement, and that was in regards to the Arts and Culture Commission, that the city is now moving forward and actually taking applications looking for commissioners, and that the deadline for applications, if you're interested in being a commissioner, is January 17th, and that there's information on the city's website, if they go to the city's homepage, that they can find a link to the application process for that. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Fulch. Any other announcements? Okay, I have a few. Experience ice fishing this Saturday, January 7th at Lake Rebecca. A fishing license is not required under our DNR permit, and bait, tackle, and poles are provided. All fishing is catch and release. Pre-registration required on the city website. Thank you to our partners, Carpenter Nature Center, National Park Service, Minnesota DNR, Hastings VFW, Hometown Ace Hardware, Get the Lead Out, Rapella, and Vexelar. City offices will be closed That is at 9 a.m., starting at 9 a.m. I believe it's 9 to 12. City offices will be closed Monday, January 16th in observance of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Recycle your old lights with the Hastings Holiday Lights Drop-Off Collection. Residents can drop off their unwanted light strands at the Joint Maintenance Facility, 920 10th Street West, during the holiday season through January 31st. January 4th, 7 p.m., there is a Arts Task Force meeting. Monday, January 9th, Planning Commission has been canceled. Tuesday, January 10th, Parks and Rec Commission has been canceled. Thursday, January 12th, 6 p.m. is HEDRA, 7 p.m. is an Operations Committee meeting. Tuesday, January 17th, 5 p.m., City Council Workshop, 5 p.m. on Elected Officials 101, 7 p.m. City Council regular meeting. 7 p.m. on Tuesday, January 17th is also a Heritage Preservation Commission. I would look for a motion to adjourn. Councilmember Pemble. And Councilmember Liefeld. No discussion. All those in favor of the motion state by saying aye. Aye. Opposed to that motion state by saying nay.